Elinore Pruitt Stewart endured a lot of hardship and tragedy early in her life, but nothing could dim her ebullience and high spirits. This evening we'll read selections from Letters of a Woman Homesteader. I'm Pat Tully of the Ketchikan Public Library, and this is Reading Aloud. Elinore Pruitt Stewart was born in 1876 in Oklahoma, and by the time she was 17, both her parents had died, leaving 8 younger siblings for Elinore to care for. When she was 26, she married a much older man and gave birth to a daughter, Jareen. Elinore's husband died soon after, and Elinore moved with her daughter to Colorado to work as a housekeeper for Mrs. Juliet Coney. Looking for adventure, in 1909, Elinore answered an advertisement by Henry Clyde Stewart for a housekeeper on his homestead in Burnt Fork, Wyoming. She kept in touch with her old employer, Mrs. Coney, by letter, and these letters were collected and published in 1914 as Letters of a Woman Homesteader. Let's get started. Burnt Fork, Wyoming, April 18th, 1909. Dear Mrs. Coney, are you thinking I am lost like the babes in the wood? Well, I am not, and I'm sure the robins would have the time of their lives getting leaves to cover me out here. I am way up close to the Forest Reserve of Utah, within half a mile of the line, 60 miles from the railroad. I was 24 hours on the train and 2 days on the stage, and oh, those 2 days. The snow was just beginning to melt, and the mud was about the worst I ever heard of. The first stage we tackled was about as rickety as it could very well be, and I had to sit with the driver, who was a Mormon and so handsome that I was not a bit offended when he insisted on making love all the way, especially after he told me he was a widower Mormon. But, of course, as I had no chaperone, I looked very fierce, not that that was very difficult with the wind and mud as allies, and told him my actual opinion of Mormons in general and particular. Meantime, my new employer, Mr. Stewart, sat upon a stack of baggage and was dreadfully concerned about something he calls his tukey, but I am unable to tell you what that is. The road, being so muddy, was full of ruts, and the stage acted as if it had the hiccups and made us all talk as though we were affected in the same way. Once Mr. Stewart asked me if I did not think it a gay-der trip. I told him he could call it gay if he wanted to, but it didn't seem very hilarious to me. Every time the stage struck a rock or a rut, Mr. Stewart would hoot, until I began to wish we would come to a hollow tree or a hole in the ground so that he could go in with the rest of the owls. At last we arrive, and everything is just lovely for me. I have a very, very comfortable situation, and Mr. Stewart is absolutely no trouble, for as soon as he has his meals, he retires to his room and plays on his bagpipe. Only he calls it his bug peep. It is the Campbells are coming, without variations, at intervals all day long and from 7 till 11 at night. Sometimes I wish they would make haste and get here. There's a saddle horse especially for me and a little shotgun with which I am to kill sage chickens. We are between 2 trout streams, so you can think of me as being happy when the snow is through melting and the water gets clear. We have the finest flock of Plymouth Rocks, and I get so many nice eggs. It sure seems fine to have all the cream I want after my town experiences. Jareen is making good use of all the good things we are having. She rides the pony to water every day. I have not filed on my land yet because the snow is 15 feet deep on it, and I think I would rather see what I'm getting, so I will wait till summer. They have just 3 seasons here, winter, and July and August. We are to plant our garden the last of May. When it is so I can get around, I will see about the land and find out all I can and tell you. I think this letter is about to reach 32ndly, so I will send you my sincerest love and quit tiring you. Please write me when you have time. Sincerely yours, Elinore Rupert. May 24th, 1909. Dear, dear Mrs. Coney, well, I have filed on my land and am now a bloated landowner. I waited a long time to even see land in the reserve, and the snow is yet too deep. So I thought that as they have but 3 months of summer and spring together, and as I wanted the land for a ranch anyway, perhaps I had better stay in the valley. So I have filed joining Mr. Stewart and am well pleased. I have a grove of 12 swamp pines on my place, and I am going to build my house there. I thought it would be very romantic to live on the peaks amid the whispering pines, but I reckon it would be powerfully uncomfortable also, and I guess my 12 can whisper enough for me, and a dandy thing is I have all the nice snow water I want. A small stream runs right through the center of my land, and I am quite near wood. A neighbor and his daughter were going to Green River, my county seat, and said I might go along, so I did, as I could file there as well as at the land office. And oh, that trip! I had more fun to the square inch than Mark Twain or Samantha Allen ever provoked. It took us a whole week to go and come. We camped out, of course, for in the whole 60 miles there was but one house, and going in that direction there is not a tree to be seen, nothing but sage, sand, and sheep. About noon the first day we came near a sheep wagon, and stalking along ahead of us was a lanky fellow, a herder, going home for dinner. Suddenly it seemed to me that I should starve if I had to wait until we got where we had planned to stop for dinner. So I called out to the man, "Little Bo Peep, have you anything to eat? If you have, we'd like to find it." And he answered, "As soon as I am able, it shall be on the table, if you'll but trouble to get behind it." Shades of Shakespeare, songs of David the shepherd poet. What do you think of us? Well, we got behind it, and a more delicious it I've never tasted. Such coffee, and out of such a pot! I promised Bo Peep that I would send him a crook with pink ribbons on it, but I suspect he thinks I am a crook without the ribbons. The sagebrush is so short in some places that it is not large enough to make a fire, so we had to drive till quite late before we camped that night. After driving all day over what seemed a level desert of sand, we came about sundown to a beautiful canyon, down which we had to drive for a couple of miles before we could cross. In the canyon the shadows had already fallen, but when we looked up we could see the last shafts of sunlight on the tops of the great bare buttes. Suddenly a great wolf started from somewhere and galloped along the edge of the canyon, outlined black and clear by the setting sun. His curiosity overcame him at last, so he sat down and waited to see what manner of beast we were. I reckon he was disappointed, for he howled most dismally. I thought of Jack London's The Wolf. After we quitted the canyon, I saw the most beautiful sight. It seemed as if we were driving through a golden haze. The violet shadows were creeping up between the hills, while away back of us the snow-capped peaks were catching the sun's last rays. On every side of us stretched the poor, hopeless desert, the sage grim and determined to live in spite of starvation, and the great, bare, desolate buttes. The beautiful colors turned to amber and rose, and then to the general tone, dull gray. Then we stopped to camp, and such a scurrying around to gather brush for the fire and to get supper. Everything tasted so good. Jereen ate like a man. Then we raised the wagon tongue and spread the wagon sheet over it and made a bedroom for us women. We made our beds on the warm, soft sand and went to bed. It was too beautiful a night to sleep, so I put my head out to look and to think. I saw the moon come up and hang for a while over the mountain, as if it were discouraged with the prospect, and the big white stars flirted shamelessly with the hills. I saw a coyote come trotting along, and I felt sorry for him, having to hunt food in so barren a place. But when presently I heard the whir of wings, I felt sorry for the sage chickens he had disturbed. At length a cloud came up, and I went to sleep, and next morning was covered 12 inches with snow. It didn't hurt us a bit, but while I was struggling with stubborn corsets and shoes, I communed with myself, after the manner of prodigals, and said how much better that I were down in Denver, even at Mrs. Coney's, digging with a skewer into the corners, seeking dirt which might be there, yea, even eating codfish, than that I should perish in this desert of imagination. So I turned the current of my imagination and fancied that I was at home before the fireplace and that the backlog was about to roll down. My fancy was in such good working trim that before I knew it, I kicked the wagon wheel, and I certainly got as warm as most sought scientist that ever read Mrs. Eddy could possibly wish. After 2 more such days, I arrived. When I went up to the office where I was to file, the door was open, and the most taciturn old man sat before a desk. I hesitated at the door, but he never let on. I coughed, yet no sign but a deeper scowl. I stepped in and modestly kicked over a chair. He whirled around like I had shot him. "Well?" he interrogated. I said, "I'm powerful glad of it. I was afraid you were sick. You looked in such pain." He looked at me a minute, then grinned and said he thought I was a book agent. Fancy me, a fat, comfortable widow trying to sell books. Well, I filed and came home. If you will believe me, the Scot was glad to see me and didn't herald the Campbells for 2 hours after I got home. I tell you, it is mighty seldom anyone's so much appreciated. No, we have no rural delivery. It is 2 miles to the office, but I go whenever I like. It is really the jolliest kind of fun to gallop down. We are 60 miles from the railroad, but when we want anything, we send by the mail carrier for it, only there is nothing to get. I know this is an inexcusably long letter, but it is snowing so hard, and you know how I like to talk. I am sure Jereen will enjoy the cards, and we will be glad to get them. Many things that are a comfort to us out here came from dear Mrs. Blank. Baby has the rabbit you gave her last Easter a year ago. In Denver, I was afraid my baby would grow up devoid of imagination. Like all the kindergartners, she depended upon others to amuse her. I was very sorry about it, for my castles in Spain have been real homes to me. But there is no fear. She has a block of wood she found in the blacksmith shop, which she calls her dear baby. A spoke out of a wagon wheel is little Margaret, and a barrel stave is bad little Johnny. Well, I must quit writing before you vote me a nuisance. With lots of love to you, your sincere friend, Elinore Pruitt. September 11th, 1909. Dear Mrs. Coney, this has been for me the busiest, happiest summer I can remember. I've worked very hard, but it has been work that I really enjoy. Help of any kind is very hard to get here, and Mr. Stewart had been too confident of getting men, so that haying caught him with too few men to put up the hay. He had no man to run the mower, and he couldn't run both the mower and the stacker, so you can fancy what a place he was in. I don't know that I ever told you, but my parents died within a year of each other and left 6 of us to shift for ourselves. Our people offered to take one here and there among them until we should all have a place, but we refused to be raised on the halves, and so arranged to stay at grandmother's and keep together. Well, we had no money to hire men to do our work, so we had to learn to do it ourselves. Consequently, I learned to do many things which girls more fortunately situated don't even know half to be done. Among the things I learned to do was the way to run a mowing machine. It cost me many bitter tears because I got sunburned, and my hands were hard, rough, and stained with machine oil, and I used to wonder how any Prince Charming could overlook all that in any girl he came to. For all I had ever read of the prince had to do with his reverently kissing her lily white hand, or doing some other fool trick with a hand as white as a snowflake. Well, when my prince showed up, he didn't lose much time letting me know that Barkis was willing, and I wrapped my hands in my old checkered apron and took him up before he could catch his breath. Then there was no more mowing, and I almost forgot I knew how until Mr. Stewart got into such a panic. If he put a man to mow, it kept them all idle at the stacker, and he just couldn't get enough men. I was afraid to tell him I could mow, for fear that he would forbid me to do so. But one morning, when he was chasing a last hope of help, I went down to the barn, took out the horses, and went to mowing. I had enough cut before he got back to show him I knew how, and as he came back manless, he was delighted as well as surprised. I was glad because I really like to mow, and besides that, I am adding feathers to my cap in a surprising way. When you see me again, you will think I am wearing a feather duster, but it is only that I have been said to have almost as much sense as a mon, and that is an honor I never aspired to, even in my wildest dreams. I have done most of my cooking at night. I have milked 7 cows every day, and I have done all the hay cutting, so you see I have been working. But I have found time to put up 30 pints of jelly and the same amount of jam for myself. I used wild fruits, gooseberries, currants, raspberries, and cherries. I have almost 2 gallons of the cherry butter, and I think it's delicious. I wish I could get some of it to you. I'm sure you would like it. We began haying July 5th and finished September 8th. After working so hard and so steadily, I decided on a day off. So yesterday I saddled the pony, took a few things I needed, and Jareen and I fared forth. Baby can ride behind quite well. We got away by sunup, and a glorious day we had. We followed a stream higher up into the mountains, and the air was so keen and clear at first we had on our coats. There was a tang of sage and pine in the air, and our horse was mid-side deep in rabbit brush, a shrub just covered with flowers that look and smell like goldenrod. The blue distance promised many alluring adventures, so we went along singing and simply gulping in summer. Occasionally a bunch of sage chickens would fly up out of the sagebrush, or a jackrabbit would leap out. Once we saw a bunch of antelope gallop over a hill, but we were out just to be out, and game didn't tempt us. I started, though, to have just as good a time as possible, so I had a fish hook in my knapsack. Presently, about noon, we came to a little dell where the grass was as soft and as green as a lawn. The creek kept right up against the hills on one side, and there were groves of quaking asp and cottonwoods that made shade, and service bushes and birches that shut off the ugly hills on the other side. We dismounted and prepared to noon. We caught a few grasshoppers, and I cut a birch pole for a rod. The trout are so beautiful now. Their sides are so silvery, with dashes of old rose and orange. Their speckles are so black, while their backs look as if they had been sprinkled with gold dust. They bite so well that it doesn't require any especial skill or tackle to catch plenty for a meal in a few minutes. In a little while I went back to where I had left my pony browsing with 8 beauties. We made a fire first. Then I dressed my trout while it was burning down to a nice bed of coals. I had brought a frying pan and a bottle of lard, salt, and buttered bread. We gathered a few service berries. Our trout were soon browned, and with water clear and as cold as ice, we had a feast. The quaking aspens are beginning to turn yellow, but no leaves have fallen. Their shadows dimpled and twinkled over the grass like happy children. The sound of the dashing, roaring water kept inviting me to cast for trout, but I didn't want to carry them so far, so we rested until the sun was getting low, and then started for home, with the song of the locusts in our ears warning us that the melancholy days are almost here. We would come up over a top of a hill into the glory of a beautiful sunset with its gorgeous colors, then down into a little valley already purpling with mysterious twilight. So on until, just at dark, we rode into our corral, and a mighty tired, sleepy little girl was powerfully glad to get home. After I had mailed my other letter, I was afraid that you would think me plumb bold about little Bo Peep, and I was a heap sorrier than you can think. If you only knew the hardships these poor men endure. They go 2 together, and sometimes it's months before they see another soul, and rarely ever a woman. I wouldn't act so free in town, but these men see people so seldom that they are awkward and embarrassed. I like to put them at their ease, and it is to be done only by being kind of hail fellow well met with them. So far no one has ever misunderstood me, and I have been treated with every courtesy and kindness, so I am powerfully glad you understand. They really enjoy doing these little things like fixing our dinner, and if my poor company can add to anyone's pleasure, I am too glad. Sincerely yours, Elinore Pruitt. P.S. Mr. Stewart is going to put up my house for me in pay for my extra work. I'm ashamed of my long letters to you, but I am such a murderer of language that I have to use it all to tell anything. Please don't entirely forget me. Your letters mean so much to me, and I will try to answer more promptly. November 22nd, 1909. My dear friend, I was dreadfully afraid that my last letter was too much for you, and now I feel plumb guilty. I really don't know how to write you, for I have to write so much to say so little, and now that my last letter made you sick, I almost wish so many things didn't happen to me, for I always want to tell you. Many things have happened since I last wrote, and Zebulon Pike is not done for by any means, but I guess I will tell you my newest experience. I am making a wedding dress. Don't grin, it isn't mine, worse luck. But I must begin at the beginning. Just after I wrote you before, there came a terrific storm which made me appreciate indoor coziness. But as only Baby and I were at home, I expected to be very lonely. The snow was just whirling when I saw someone pass the window. I opened the door, and in came the dumpiest little woman and 2 daughters. She asked me if I was Ms. Rupert. I told her that she had almost guessed it, and then she introduced herself. She said that she was Miss Lane, that she had heard there was a new stranger in the country, so she had brought her twin girls, Sedalia and Regalia, to be neighborly. While they were taking off their many coats and wraps, it came out that they were from Linwood, 30 miles away. I was powerful glad that I had a pot roast and some baked beans. After we had put the horses in the barn, we had dinner, and I heard the story of the girls' odd names. The mother is one of those comfy, fat little women who remain happy and bubbling with fun in spite of hard knocks. I had already fallen in love with Regalia. She is so jolly and unaffected, so fat and so plain. Sedalia has a veneer of most uncomfortable refinement. She was shocked because Gail ate all the roast she wanted, and if I had been very sensitive, I would have been in tears, because I ate a helping more than Gail did. But about the names. It seemed that Miss Lane married quite young, was an orphan, and had no one to tell her things she should have known. She lived in Missouri, but about a year after her marriage, the young couple started overland for the West. It was in November, and one night they had reached the plains, a real blue blizzard struck them. Miss Lane had been in pain all day, and soon she knew what was the matter. They were alone, and it was a day's travel back to the last house. The team had given out, and the wind and sleet were seeing which could do the most meanness. At last the poor man got a fire started, and a wagon sheet stretched in such a manner that it kept off the sleet. He fixed a bed under the poor shelter, and did all he could to keep the fire from blowing away, and there, a few hours later, a little girl baby was born. They melted sleet in the frying pan to get water to wash it. Miss Lane kept feeling no better fast, and about the time they got the poor baby dressed, a second little one came. Then she told me herself as proof she didn't die, I guess, but it is right hard to believe she didn't. Luckily, the fire lasted until the babies were dressed, and the mother began to feel better, for there was no wood. Soon the wind stopped and the snow fell steadily. It was warmer, and the whole family snuggled up under the wagon sheet and slept. Mr. Lane is a powerful, good husband. He waited 2 whole days for his wife to gain strength before he resumed the journey, and on the 3rd morning he actually carried her to the wagon. Just think of it! Could more be asked of any man? Every turn of the wheel made poor Miss Lane more homesick. Like Mrs. Wiggs of the Cabbage Patch, she had the taste for geographical names, and Miss Lane is very loyal, so she wanted to call the little firstborn Missouri. Mr. Lane said that she might, but if she did, he would call the other one Arkansas. Sometimes homesickness would almost master her. She would hug up the little red baby and murmur, Missouri, and then Daddy would growl playfully to Arkansas. It went on that way for a long time, and at last she remembered that Sedalia was in Missouri, so she felt glad and really named the older baby Sedalia. but she could think of nothing to match the name and was in constant fear the father would name the other baby Little Rock. For 3 years, poor Gail was just t'other one. Then the Lanes went to Green River, where some lodge was having a parade. They were watching the drill when a bystander was standing by, said something about the fine regalia. Instantly, Miss Lane thought of her unnamed child. So since that time, Gail has had a name. There could be no two people more unlike than the sisters. Sedalia is really handsome, and she is thin. But she is vain, selfish, shallow, and conceited. Gail is not even pretty, but she is clean and she is honest. She does many little things that are not exactly polite, but she is good and true. They both went to the barn with me to milk. Gail tucked up her skirts and helped me. She said, "I just love a stable, with its hay and its comfortable, contented cattle. I never go into one without thinking of the little baby Christ. I almost expect to see a little red baby in the straw every time I peek into the manger." Sedalia answered, "Well, for heaven's sake, get out of the stable to preach. Who wants to stand among these smelly cows all day?" They stayed with us almost a week, and one day when Gail and I were milking, she asked me to invite her to stay with me a month. She said to ask her mother, and left her mother and myself much together. But Sedalia stuck to her mother like a plaster, and I just could not stand Sedalia for a whole month. However, I was spared all embarrassment, for Miss Lane asked me if I could not find work enough to keep Gail busy for a month or two. She went on to explain that Sedalia was expecting to be married, and that Gail was so common she would really spoil the match. I was surprised and indignant, especially as Sedalia sat and listened so brazenly. So I said I thought Sedalia would need all the help she could get to get married, and I should be glad to have Gail visit me as long as she liked. So Gail stayed on with me. One afternoon she had gone to the post office when I saw Mr. Patterson ride up. He went into the bunkhouse to wait until the men should come. Now, from something Gail had said, I fancied that Bob Patterson must be the right man. I am afraid I am not very delicate about that kind of meddling, and while I had been given to understand that Patterson was the man Sedalia expected to marry, I didn't think any man would choose her if he could get Gail, so I called him. We had a long chat, and he told me frankly he wanted Gail, but that she didn't care for him, and that they kept throwing that danged Sedalia at him. Then he begged my pardon for saying danged, but I told him I approved of the word when applied to Sedalia, and broke the news to him that Gail was staying with me. He fairly beamed. So that night I left Gail to wash dishes and Bob to help her, while I held Mr. Stewart a prisoner in the stable and questioned him regarding Patterson's prospects and habits. I found both all that need be, and told Mr. Stewart about my talk with Patterson, and he said, "Woman, some day you'll gang plume daft." But he admitted he was glad it was the bonny lassie instead of the bony one. When we went into the house, Mr. Stewart said, "Well, when are you Duchy bairns gangin' to the kirk?" They left it to me, so I said Thanksgiving Day, and as there is no kirk to gang to, we are going to have a justice of the peace, and they are going to be married here. We're going to have the dandiest dinner that I can cook, and Mr. Stewart went to town the next day for the wedding dress, the gayest plaid outside of Caledonia. But Gail has lots of sense and is going to wear it. I have almost finished, and while it doesn't look just like a Worth model, it still looks plumb good for me to have made. The boys are going up after Zebulon Pike, and Mr. Stewart is going after Ms. Lane. Joy waves are radiating from this ranch, and about Thanksgiving morning, one will strike you. With lots of love and happy wishes, your ex-wash lady, Elinore Pruitt. April 5th, 1910. Dear Mrs. Coney, I find upon rereading your letter that I did not answer it at all when I wrote you. You must think me very indifferent, but I really don't mean to be. My house joins onto Mr. Stewart's house. It was built that way so I could hold down my land and a job at the same time. I see the wisdom of it now, though at first I did not want it that way. My boundary lines run within 2 feet of Mr. Stewart's house, so it was quite easy to build on. I think the Pattersons' ranch is about 25 miles from us. I am glad to tell you that they are doing splendidly. Gail is just as thrifty as she can be, and Bobby is steady and making money fast. Their baby is the dearest little thing. I've heard that Sedalia is to marry a Mormon bishop, but I doubt it. She puts on very disgusting airs about our Bobby, and she patronizes Gail most shamefully. But Gail, bless her unconscious heart, is so happy in her husband and son that she doesn't know Sedalia is insulting. My dear old grandmother, whom I love so much, has gone home to God. I used to write long letters to her. I should like a few addresses of old persons who are as lonely as she was, who would like letters such as I write. You know I can't be brief. I have tried and cannot. If you know of any persons who would not tire of my long accounts, and who would care to have them, you will be doing me a favor to let me know. I have not treated you quite frankly about something that you had a right to know about. I am ashamed and I regret very much that I have not told you. I so dread the possibility of losing your friendship that I will never tell you unless you promise me beforehand to forgive me. I know that it is unfair, but it is the only way I can see out of a difficulty that my foolish reticence has led me into. Few people, perhaps, consider me reticent, but in some cases I am afraid that I am even deceitful. Won't you make it easy to fess so I may be happy again? Truly your friend, Elinore Pruitt. June 16th, 1910. My dear friend, your card just to hand. I wrote you some time ago telling you I had a confession to make, and I've had no letter since, so thought perhaps you were scared I had done something too bad to forgive. I am suffering just now from eye strain, and can't see to write long at a time, but I reckon I had better confess and get it done with. The thing I have done is to marry Mr. Stewart. It was such an inconsistent thing to do that I was ashamed to tell you. And, too, I was afraid you would think I didn't need your friendship and might desert me. Another of my friends thinks that way. I hope my eyes will be better soon, and then I will write you a long letter. Your old friend with a new name, Elinore Stewart. The end. Thank you so much for joining me, and have a very good evening.